He's a toddler. Hey,
Yeah.
hey, everyone. Greetings. It's Naomi Wolf with one of my favorite people, heroines, a great, great heroine of this time, and it's Jenin Younes. Welcome, Jenin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, Jenin Younes is litigation counsel at an important First Amendment firm, and having always been a passionate advocate for individual liberties, she spent the first part of her career as an appellate public defender, providing representation to indigent clients convicted of criminal offenses in New York City. You hit the ground running, Jenin. In this capacity, she briefed and argued countless appeals in New York's Appellate Division, Second Department, and several cases in the New York State Court of Appeals. After witnessing governments throughout the nation violate human rights and civil liberties in an ostensible effort to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, Jenin became active in fighting against lockdowns and related policies. She has litigated against COVID-19 vaccine mandates and played a significant role in First Amendment challenges to the government's involvement in censorship on social media, including in Missouri versus Biden, a case initially brought by the attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana, in which NCLA represents two of the co-signers, I beg your pardon, in which she helped to represent two of the co-signers of the Great Barrington Declaration, Drs. Jay Bhattacharya, now our NIH director, and Dr. Martin Kulldorff of Harvard. She led a successful effort to preliminarily enjoin California's law punishing doctors for disseminating so-called misinformation about COVID-19 to patients. And she also served as senior special counsel on the House Judiciary Committee's Weaponization of Government Subcommittee's investigation into the government's role in censoring speech on social media. She's written for the Wall Street Journal, Tablet Magazine, Bloomberg Law, among other outlets. She has a BA from Cornell and a JD from NYU School of Law. And she's one of the most principled people I know. And I'm just going to kind of launch right in before we get into the subject of the day, which is the tragedy of Gaza and what it's like to be an advocate for civil rights and liberties for the people of Gaza in the United States right now. We'll get into that in a moment, of course, but I just wanted to kind of orient people to where we first met. We met at the American Institute of Economic Research, where you and I would talk to each other in befuddlement in 2021, into I think 2022 as former lefties. You used to call yourself Lefty Lockdown on Twitter. Do you want to speak to that? Your exile or emigration from the left, the same place I originated?
Yeah. So, I mean, I considered myself more or less on the left, even though I always had some disagreements with them. I mean, that, of course, I'm making generalizations, but I felt as though, in a general sense, the left was becoming too authoritarian and anti-free speech. And there were issues like I would disagree on, such as trans women playing in women's sports. And find myself ostracized just for saying, I think actually I agree with the writer of the op-ed who says, there are reasons maybe we should be skeptical of this. But nevertheless, I mean, I'm very concerned about economic inequality, other forms of inequality. I generally am pretty liberal socially. I'm pro-gay marriage, pro-choice, all of that stuff. So I considered myself more or less on the left. But then when COVID happened, I was pretty shocked because I thought it was a pretty basic application of sort of classical liberal principles to be opposed to the idea of allowing the government to just shut down to society, tell kids they can't go to school, tell people they have to shut their businesses down, they can't go to work. And then that was followed by mandates. So I ended up I don't know if I wanted to say I don't feel as though I changed. I know a lot of people say that. I felt as though I was actually just applying the principles I already had. And most of the people around me were sort of falling for this authoritarian nonsense, partially out of a knee-jerk response to Donald Trump, thinking that he cared about the economy and not lives, as though you can separate those two things. So that's sort of in a nutshell. I ended up sort of working with a lot of people on the right, libertarian, but also conservatives. And that's where more or less I'm working these days.
Wow. I remember that you and I would kind of touch base sometimes day by day, right? Because we were both fellows there at this beautiful stone mansion on a hilltop. And and I think both of us were in a state of shock, because I guess what I'm asking is, could you have ever imagined that the people you thought were civilized, educated, liberal, lowercase l, European definition, open-minded, expansive, would be so authoritarian?
No, I was pretty surprised. So even though, as I mentioned, I thought that the left was kind of moving in an authoritarian direction in certain ways, I didn't think that they would just wholesale adopt this idea that you could, tell an entire society that they have to stay in their houses and they can't see friends and relatives for, pretty long periods of time. I mean, I was alarmed from the beginning, but okay, I can give like maybe for 15 days or 30 days. Nobody knows what's going on. We don't know how serious this is. Maybe, the government just has to have some latitude. But after that, to allow these measures to drag on, and a lot of what I saw was clearly people not really being afraid of the virus, but just sort of using it as an excuse to be controlling, which I don't like.
Why do you think you were able to escape that kind of mind virus and that lust for control?
I'm not sure, because I actually did have Trump derangement syndrome too. I really thought like Donald Trump was the worst thing that happened. And, I cried when he got elected, and I, continued to think he was just a horrible person. So I'm not sure. From a sort of common sense standpoint, it didn't make sense to me. Like, it was very clear that the people who were pushing the idea of lockdowns and mandates had not considered the downsides, or at least weren't including them in their assessments. They were only talking about mitigating the spread of the virus. And I'm like, well, wait a sec. If you're going to have such, if you're going to implement such significant measures, like shutting down all of society for months or even years in some places, you'd better be considering the consequences of doing that in terms of like supply chain disruptions, education, mental health, all of those things. And so that was very evident to me that this was just considering one factor, which you can't do when you make policy, and certainly not for long periods of time. Another thing is I had very strict parents, so I don't like it when people tell me what to do. I'm automatically, if someone's like, you can't leave your house, my first reaction is like, well, you have to give me a very good reason.
Take away this is really great background. Now we have to fast forward because we only have a limited time with you today, but I wanted to speak with you about Gaza specifically because I owe you a platform, essentially. And the reason I say that is I'm Jewish. You are descended, at least for part of your heritage, from Palestinians, and you have been championing or speaking up for the people of Palestine, and you've also been speaking up against encroachments on free speech in the name of under the guise of fighting anti-Semitism. So let's take them one by one. What do you want to use this platform to say about what's happening to the people of Gaza?
Well, there's so much to say, it's hard to know where to start. Yeah, as you noted, my father is Palestinian. He grew up in the West Bank and emigrated to the United States in his 20s. Actually, my mother's father was German Jewish and fled Nazi Germany. So I have some connection in 1936 because he and his family were terrified of the Nazis. I have some connection to both sides. I think what's happening in Gaza is horrendous. Right now, the entire population of over 2 million people is being starved. There are no supplies coming in or out, nothing coming in or out. 50% of Gaza is under 18, so, children. And this is sort of classic collective punishment. I mean, the Israeli government is using them to basically pressure Hamas to release the hostages, supposedly. I don't actually believe that. I think that they would still be implementing collective punishment measures or trying to forcibly transfer them out of Gaza, and possibly even continuing this blockade, even if they did release the hostages. Obviously, I wish they hadn't taken the hostages. Nobody should ever take civilian hostages. I'm not pro-Hamas in any way at all. I never countenance violence, or especially against civilians. I don't countenance what Hamas did on October 7th or in keeping hostages thereafter. At this point, though, I mean, you can't, a government that calls itself democratic and Western and civilized can't collectively punish an entire population because of the actions of a militia group.
So thank you. That was incredibly succinctly put. And it's such a morass that I appreciate you kind of identifying the key issue as crisply as you just did, and also acknowledging, because things quickly go off the rails, that no civilians anywhere should get caught up in military activities. Talk about what's going on, if you would, from the vantage point of international law, if you've looked at that. Is it legal to engage in collective punishment?
No. So, I mean, with the caveat, I'm not an international law expert. I've studied a little bit. I studied a little bit in law school, and I keep up a tiny bit. But no, I mean, so the sort of international law that came out of World War II, this general understanding was like, this was horrific. So many people died. I mean, many people died in the Holocaust, Jews especially. Lots and lots of people died all over. I mean, in Russia, just the loss of human life was so incredible that we don't ever want this to happen again. So the idea was to enact safeguards that sort of recognize the importance of every civilian life above everything. We value human life, innocent civilians, above anything else, and we don't punish people for the actions of their government or because of other their actions of other people in their ethnic group. These are sort of very, very key principles that came out of it. So you can't use, I mean, both morally and under international law, you cannot use the punishment of civilians to pressure a government. Certainly not when you're talking about like starving them to death, as is happening now. And as a lot of people have pointed out, ironically, it's the people who are dying now are the most vulnerable ones, babies, people with disabilities, children, like young Hamas fighters are going to be the last to be punished by this because, they're younger, they're young, but not babies. They're healthy. So, I mean, what we're seeing now a lot of like babies and children with disabilities dying.
Good God. Forgive my ignorance, and I'm not minimizing what you've just said at all, but Gaza also has a border with Egypt, and it has an ally in Jordan, right across the Gulf, and right across the Gulf of Aqaba. And why are supplies not coming in from those allies?
So they usually enforce whatever, they have agreements with Israel basically to enforce whatever Israel wants. They're usually afraid to, and they also work with the United States. I'm not a fan of the other Arab states. I don't think they've done the right thing by the Palestinians for decades. They're not doing it now. I think they also believe that if they help, that they will be seen as enabling what Israel is doing. And so, it's a difficult question. It's come up. What about moving Palestinians to Egypt, Jordan?
I'm not suggesting that, but just
no. I'm just, and they've said no. They've said no to mass numbers, which I think is pretty reasonable because taking that number of refugees would be destabilizing. But I think they also they know that their citizens would see it as them enabling what Israel is doing in terms of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. So I'm not a huge fan of the other Arab governments, but I think what they're doing is essentially at the behest of Israel and the United States.
Right. And so like Red Cross aid, like international NGOs are not being allowed in by Israel to bring food to children. Is that really true?
No. Yeah, they're not. So I was just reading, not a single grain of rice has entered in since March 7th, I think, or March 3rd. I can't remember now. But the situation is dire. The UN just issued a statement basically saying, this has to end now. Trump actually is not happy with it. And there seems to be some dispute between him and Netanyahu. I'm not exactly sure what the details are, but news just came out today that he said he's going to proceed with relations with Saudi Arabia, notwithstanding Israel's position.
I think that's probably healthy.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
So what, I mean, I guess what's depressing to me about any conversation, for the most part, about Israel-Palestine is it quickly devolves into a kind of existentially depressing chess match, right? For
Yeah.
instance, right in the comments, someone, Brina, is saying, quote, Palestinians voted for Hamas. There's no such thing as innocent Palestinians. I hear that a lot in very ultra Jewish circles or ultra Zionist circles, which
Yeah.
is a horrible sentence. No one is starving to death. Have you seen their obese parents? This is hysterical. Well, that's not helpful. We'll just skip over the second half of that. But the first half, I don't even want to kind of bring this to you, because what I find happens, and why I wanted to have you on, is, people who are pro-Israel and pro-Palestine engage in like pointless whataboutery,
Yeah.
and some of the dumber things people say on our side is there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. They all voted for Hamas, as if children, are guilty,
Yeah.
right? That's dumb. And it's also illegal. As international
Yeah.
law, civilians are supposed to be left
Well,
out.
and there haven't been elections in Gaza since 2006.
Oh, well,
And the average age is under 18. So
right. Oh,
it's
wow.
just,
So,
and
yeah.
I mean, it's just a silly thing to say. Do we deserve to die because of the actions of President Trump or President Biden? That's totally ridiculous.
Totally.
Yeah.
However, and may I just say, for even-handedness, in the marches, many of which are paid, which is also demoralizing, you see people who really don't know the first thing about the region chanting things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is a scary thing for Jews or people who support some Jewish presence in Israel to hear, because it sounds genocidal. What are you going to do with, Jewish Israel, Zionist Israel? Do you just wipe it out? My point is, a sane discussion about diplomatic solutions between the people of Palestine and the people of Israel seems rare these days. What would you say to that? I'm not asking
Well,
you
it's it's almost impossible. And as someone who's tried to talk about this issue for pretty much my whole life, I can tell you it's not new. It's never been, it's never been sane, and the emotions run very high on all sides of it. And I, on the when in my world, advocating for Palestinians at all comes with, I mean, very serious career repercussions, negative repercussions.
I want you to talk about that, if you would, unless there's something more you'd like us to know about the children or the civilians in Gaza that we may not know or we may not believe. I really want you in the rest of the time we have, which is limited, to go into detail about what's happening in America in relation to this issue, what it's like for you, and also to address some of these anti-boycott bills, the extradition of this Columbia graduate student, and so on. So
sure.
So,
well, if I may, very quickly before we end that subject, I mean, I do think one thing, and it's been hard for me to hear my whole life, as maybe people can imagine, that it's Palestinians, there's no innocent Palestinian, and they're a cult of death, and this and that. I mean, I grew up with a Palestinian father. He was very close with his family. We didn't get to see them very much because it's extremely difficult to travel to the West Bank for Palestinians. They were like the kindest people I ever met. My father is a very kind, gentle man. He loved us beyond anything. He always put us first. He's like, he can't even kill a fly. I'm not kidding. Like he teaches at Cornell. He has a lot of Jewish students. He has no animosity towards them whatsoever. He actually takes them often. All of his students who want to go, he takes to his village in the West Bank in Jordan.
oh, wow. Wow. Good for him.
Yeah. So this is just a fiction that that Palestinians are somehow totally different, and they just wake up in the morning hating Jews. And that's their goal in life, is just to kill Jewish people. It's not. There are certainly issues that have resulted from a very long ongoing conflict where Palestinians have lost land and been driven into refugee camps and now live under occupation in Gaza and the West Bank. I'm not not justifying violence, but what happens in those situations is sometimes there tends to be animosity. But so anyway, just a lot of these things about Palestinian culture are just they're simply not true. And I think they're excuses to justify collective punishment, basically.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the United States, I mean, the speech suppression stuff that we're seeing is probably some of the most disturbing in our country's history. I mean, there was similar things happened during like the Red Scare era. There were people who were deported for belonging to the Communist Party, and the Supreme Court upheld those deportations. I don't think those decisions were right. So I don't want to say this is the only time in our history we've seen anything like this, but it comes close. Putting people in immigration detention and deportation proceedings for participating in protests or writing op-eds is pretty disturbing. And, you know, I hear a lot of what people say is, well, the protesters were taking over a building and they were doing this. Well, you know, in criminal or any kind of law, people aren't punished based on the actions of other people who were sort of loosely affiliated with or who are participating in the same movement. You have to tie someone's specific actions to unlawful activity. And here, I mean, I think the main people are Rumeysa Ozturk, who so far the government has only pointed to an op-ed she wrote arguing that Tufts University should divest from Israel. Mahmoud Khalil.
I mean, that's not a crime. That's First Amendment.
No. So none of these people have been charged with crimes. Yeah, the Secretary Rubio is using a statute, an INA statute that's sort of obscure and very rarely used to deport people. And it basically says that the Secretary of State can unilaterally deem someone a threat to our foreign policy and remove them from the country. It's not invoked very often. In fact, there's only one judicial decision on it because it's so very rarely used, federal judicial in the Article 3 court. And by coincidence, it's Judge Barry, who's Trump's sister, wrote that decision. And she said that the statute was unconstitutionally vague and couldn't be used to deport this Mexican diplomat, or I think it was a Mexican diplomat's brother. That decision was reversed by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, but not on those grounds. It was reversed on like unrelated jurisdictional grounds. So they didn't say her reasoning was wrong. Right. But that's not binding precedent. So we'll see what other courts say. But so the courts right now there have been a number of decisions where the government has been trying to argue that the federal courts don't have jurisdiction and these cases should be decided in immigration court. And the federal courts have said, no, you can challenge the legality or the constitutionality of the statute in an Article 3 federal court, which is good.
Okay, I see what you're saying. From the First Amendment perspective, it's good. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, yeah, because immigration judges, they're not independent. A lot of people don't know this. They're part of the executive branch. They're administrative. So they tend to just rubber stamp what the government wants. And they're also, they don't have the intellectual chops of Article 3 federal judges. So they wouldn't be well versed in the First Amendment or that kind of thing. So you're
going into kind of a stratosphere of intellectual perceptiveness, which is your specialty, but to bring it down to earth for non-lawyers. The bottom line is it's good from your perspective because otherwise we'd all, or people who might come to this country to teach or to work, might all be at risk of being deported because of our points of view, our peaceful First Amendment protected point of view. Is that the bottom line for you?
That is. And so when some of my pro-Israel friends have sort of championed this, I've said, during COVID, I had a friend who was here on an H-1B visa from, I forgot what kind of visa, from Australia. He wrote for the Australian and he's very anti-lockdown. He was writing against lockdowns and mask mandates. Under this theory, Biden could have said, this jeopardizes our foreign policy of fighting COVID all over the world and deported him. So once you start interpreting these statutes so broadly or these laws so broadly, it can easily be turned against you when the opposition party is in power. So I always warn people, and we want to be able to encourage talented people to come to our country, or students. They invest in our system. We want, one of the people who's being held, Mahmoud Khalil, is married to a US citizen. He has a green card. His daughter was just born last month. He wasn't able to be there for her birth.
Mm.
We want, people have to be able to make plans and build lives here. And
Mm.
I don't think green card holders should have to live in fear that if they say the wrong thing, and share their life story, that they can be thrown in detention and taken away from their family.
Yeah, that's really not the American tradition.
No.
Let's go to something in our last few minutes that really could affect not just foreigners visiting, but Americans. And that's the many, many states, and I've seen these state bills that are criminalizing anti-Israel commentary or forbidding contractors with the state government, and I think possibly the federal government. I think there may have been a bill introduced if they express criticism of Israel, basically, and that these bills redefine criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. Do you want to speak to those? And isn't there kind of a well-known example of that coming up or happening federally? Yes, there was. It just got killed, right?
Yeah. So I think they saw that there was a lot of backlash, probably on Twitter, and it got pulled. So that was there. As you correctly said, there are a number of. Sorry, can you hear me? I'm having a weird.
Yeah. I hear you loud and clear. Just keep talking.
Okay. So there are a number of states, I think around 30, that have laws saying that if you boycott Israel, you can't get a contract with the state. And as an example, there were hurricane victims in Texas had to sign a pledge saying that they didn't boycott Israel in order to get relief funds. All of these are different state laws, so they might be applied a little bit differently. But obviously, that's boycott is considered encapsulated in the First Amendment, included in the First Amendment, sort of free speech, free expression, that sort of thing. People have tried to challenge these over the years, and what happens is the state will just say, okay, we'll let you have the contract so that they don't have to defend it in court, but it kind of exists to chill activity. So this was now escalated, and Representative Mike Lawler introduced a bill that would have, I guess it would have criminalized boycotting Israel. It was it was sort of confusing language. So I'm not entirely sure if it could be applied to an individual or if it was only like a business, but basically carried a 20-year prison sentence, up to 20-year prison sentence, and $1 million fine for boycotting Israel. And that's not like in receiving contracts from the state or something. That was just like outright. So that's really, shocking. I think the outrage was really palpable on Twitter, and even coming from the right, which they didn't expect. A lot of people were just like, wait a second, I might like Israel, but I also have the right to boycott it if I want. I don't like this. So they pulled it. So it didn't, and actually, Marjorie Taylor Greene came out really strongly against it.
He was so excellent. I think Thomas Massey also spoke up.
Yes,
which is very
good. I expect that from him. He's great. I mean,
he is great. But it's a real. I mean, I don't want the anti-Semites to come out of the woodwork, which is a risk always when these things come up. But AIPAC's influence it is a scary thing, just like pharma's influence is a scary thing, or the influence of, China on our elected officials is a scary thing. And we should have our elected representatives be legislating for us and not for any foreign country. And I just want to say, before I ask my last question, as an American Jew, I find it very offensive that whoever is launching these bills, AIPAC or other, lobbyists, J Street probably not, because they're more moderate, but
I don't think so.
Whoever it is, they don't have my consent to use redefine criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. I might want to criticize Israel, and as they say, it's bad for the Jews, as my grandma Faye would have said. It's not good for us. Seriously, it just stokes anti-Semitism to have anti-Semitism be used to muzzle Americans. Now let's go to my last question, which is, what's it been like for you personally? Has it, like, here you are again, right? People who are around you that you thought were your friends or allies, or people who with whom you could have an honest civil conversation, things are probably fracturing along the Israel-Palestine lines, or, Jewish Muslim lines. What would you, I'm not saying you're Muslim, I'm saying, often.
I'm not. No,
What's it been like
Yeah,
for you?
so it is like going through the COVID thing all over again. I mean, I sort of made an entirely new friend group, and then after October 7th, people were on a very different side of this issue. And, some of it was, I think we just don't really have anything to talk about anymore, so we're going to go our separate ways. And then some of it was more nasty. I mean, there were a lot of people who were pretty nasty to me about my views. And I'm not, a lot of people, frankly, you're obviously not one of them, but a lot of people have no idea what they're talking about. Like, they just don't really know anything about the subject. And they think, oh, Hamas, Muslims, all bad, 9/11. This is kind of like 9/11. Let's just kill them all. And, I know something about this. My family's from there. Half my family's from there. Like, the fact that they wouldn't listen to me, that's pretty disappointing. And it's hard for me to, I think, continue friendships with people who aren't at least willing to listen to what I have to say and not be nasty. I mean, a lot of people were pretty nasty to me, and because this is not a tactic I engage in, but because I was saying things they didn't like about Palestine, they were trying to embarrass me by using like personal information they had about me, because we had been friends and stuff on Twitter. I mean, I just ignore it, but obviously I'm not going to continue a friendship where somebody behaves that way.
Awful, Jenin. Oh my God. So horrible.
Yeah.
Ew.
Yeah.
That's
I'm not
awful.
going to name names.
We don't want to get sued.
I mean, no, the upside is what happens is, you figure out who your real friends are in these times.
Yeah, it's just horrible. Before we close, is there, without, naming names or getting into that, what kinds of nasty things did people say to you when you tried to share your experience?
Oh, well, calling me names, saying that, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. My dad wasn't a Palestinian. Like, okay. And then, I mean, I was actually friends with some of these people. So they know, we've talked, we're friends. They know personal things about me. So they were trying to embarrass me by like sharing personal information.
But were you called like a Jew hater or anything like that?
Oh, I'm sure they said that. Yeah. I mean, I try not, people will sometimes send me screenshots like you won't believe, but I don't go scour people's social media to see the nasty things they're saying about me. I have like enough problems in my life. So I usually just block and move on.
Jenin, we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. I just want to say I'm so very sorry that this is happening. We should, in America, be able to have civil, open conversations, even if we don't agree, especially if we don't agree. We can always learn and find places, even if we don't agree, that we're better informed or can find possibilities that we didn't think about before. And just realizing that the other person is human and maybe not genocidal toward oneself is always better than hurling hostile epithets and wanting to wipe each other off the face of the earth. Where can people find you? How can they support you or find out more about what you're talking about? What are some websites about maybe the Middle East situation that you trust, that you refer people to? What do you want to share as a final?
That's a good question. So I'm on Twitter, Jenin Younes, JeninYounesESQ. Websites. I didn't think about that in advance. So I tend to read articles that I see on Twitter, and then I read the New York Times. It's kind of embarrassing, I guess. There are a lot of people I follow who I think are very good on this issue.
I mean, Al Jazeera is solid, right? I wouldn't say it's unbiased.
Yeah.
It's solid.
Yeah, I like Al Jazeera. I think they do a reasonably good job.
Haaretz is solid and pretty easy. Haaretz, the Israeli.
Yes. Yeah, actually, they're much better than any American publication. They're paywalled, a lot of their articles. So most of their articles. So I often just read the blurbs. Peter Boehnert is really good on this issue. He has sort of transitioned from being pretty Zionist to being I don't know how he would describe himself now. He went through a period where he called himself a liberal Zionist. He wrote a book called Being Jewish After Gaza, I think. And I'm not actually, people told me it was very good. I haven't actually read it, so I don't know what he said.
And what about you? So people can follow you on Twitter, and how do they?
Yeah.
how do they help you? I mean, how do you want people to help you in this issue? Just talk to their neighbors, read more about it.
Yeah.
Don't yell
Yeah.
at people. What do you want people to do?
Reading more about it and understanding that everybody almost everybody is sort of human and tends to want the same things, and people act badly often because of their circumstances, but dehumanizing entire groups of people is really dangerous. It's led to most of the mass atrocities that we recognize from history, and it's happening again. So
well said, well said. And presumably we can lobby POTUS to end the blockade and let the kids at least be fed, right?
Yeah, well, it looks, I just read before we started that something had happened there. I mean, Trump is insinuating that he has some plan to get aid into Gaza. So, I mean, if he would pressure Netanyahu, that would be huge, because they, the Israeli government depends on U.S. support, which is why protests are directed at our government, because we're essentially enabling what's happening.
Right. Well, so much more to say, but I think you've enlightened us today, and you've done it with your characteristic wisdom, grace, and patience, and intellectual brilliance. So I want to thank you, Jenin Younes, and thank your family. The cutest baby of his generation has appeared in the Jenin Younes. And so we send him and you our love and our support, and come back anytime. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Naomi.
Okay. Bye.